Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. Tonight's episode brought to you by the internet. If you want to follow us on social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at SWGM Podcast. Like, subscribe, share on YouTube, youtube.com/Savage Worlds GM Podcast, and the same moniker on iTunes, iTunes/Savage Worlds GM Podcast. And if you enjoy what we do, want to get behind the program, feel free to stop by Patreon and join, subscribe, throw us a buck. And at certain levels, you get special access to the Green Room, the 30-minute show that happens before the show. And that's at patreon.com.
I hear that maybe, just maybe, there might even be a physical store coming.
Possibly. And as always, if you're watching the online stream, feel free to participate in the chat. We do bring that into the show, discuss it. Tonight's episode, we're going to talk in real life. How much verisimilitude is necessary in your role-playing games, and not only that, how does Savage Worlds handle it? And to discuss it, Chris, the Savage Mommy Fox.
Hello.
Dave, the Rules Maven Scott.
Greetings and salutations.
Dustin, the Savage Zealot Smith.
Hello, children.
And the show's new mascot, Grig, the Goblin Raptor.
Great pop. Great pop.
So let's go ahead and start this conversation. So what are we talking about when we're talking about verisimilitude? It's talking about how much reality you're trying to simulate in your role-playing game. All right. So I think we would all agree that Savage Worlds kind of walks the fence between here's mechanics that are intended to be narratively abstracted, as well as here's some very specific stats about weapons, vehicles, and things of that nature. Discuss.
One of my favorite quotes from the different people talking about this actually comes from you, Jared, on that specific topic, and it's that Savage Worlds is the right kind of peanut butter, has just enough crunch that you can smooth out all the edges, you can do a nice narrative treatment, but when you want to get to the nitty gritty, you want to put minis down on a battle mat and actually like measure stuff out. It's got all those rules. If you want to go theater of the mind, it's got those rules too. It's got just enough crunch without being bloated by that and having, a special rule for every situation. Now, that was said back in the deluxe days. I think, if anything, Suede just makes that more true.
Yeah, I was going to say they've done a better job and made that even more of a standard.
Yeah, because now they've got rules for like if you are playing theater of the mind and don't have the minis out, they've got a conversion there that says it's not just this many inches, but it's this many total targets that it hits or something. Like they set a standard for what these things do so that if you're having a hard time getting that crunch in the moment, there's an actual spot in the book that references it. But I guess my question to you guys, because I know this is very subjective, and obviously it's going to be fairly subjective to the audience, but for each of you, how much like real world physics are you trying to have actually interact in your game?
I think, well, and this, I'm not being patronizing when I say this, but obviously it depends on the style of game you're playing, right? So if you're playing I almost did it. Hashtag Dustin, stop talking about Star Wars. I almost referenced Star Wars. You're playing Indiana Jones. That's kind of over the top, two-fisted action. Can you jump out of an airplane?
Say the word pulpy just.
I'm not going to. Can you jump out of an airplane on an inflatable raft and land in the mountains on a river stream without dying? In that world, yeah, you absolutely can. Can you in the real world? Not a chance in hell. Maybe 1 in 1 millionth of a chance you're not going to die.
What about in a love letter to Romero regarding the living dead? Could you jump out of an airplane with nothing but a raft and hope to survive?
Yeah, no. No.
So, at least for me, I find I tend towards games that are a little more grounded in reality, but that's because that's where my mind goes. I really can't get into and enjoy games where the game itself isn't grounded in some form of reality. Yeah, it might be fantasy, there might be elves, there might be magic, but like the magic has to have rules, it has to be grounded, it has to work the same way every time it's brought up. Like if magic works one way on day one and another way on day two, I lose all interest.
Right.
And you see a lot of these kind of slapdash silly stuff. A great example of this is one of the more beloved Savage World settings, which is I'm trying to Low Life, I think it's called. That's very kind of silly, nasty, grungy. It's in a very slapsticky style world. It just doesn't resonate for me, and I can't get behind it. It's not that it's poorly written or bad. A lot of people love it. I just can't do that.
Well, I think, and it's also too, you can do this, and I'm not talking about the Superpowers companion, by the way, when I'm about to mention. But if you were going to pick up Savage Worlds core rules and go, hey, I want to run sort of a low level superheroes game, or maybe even a higher level superheroes game, one of the classic cliches and tropes of that genre. Oh, I throw you through a concrete block, and you go bashing through 4 or 5 of them. Get up and go. And you're back at it. You could just say, hey, you know what? When that happens, you take a level of bumps and bruises. You take a level of fatigue for bumps and bruises to add some realism into it. And you can do that, and it's not game breaking for the genre.
And I think you could do that as a gradient scale, because I think it would be, if you're playing, say, a DC game where the heroes are a little more powerful typically, I think you can have the character get thrown through several walls and take no damage. It's just a narrative. I roll my push, get several successes, and I've thrown you through several walls. It didn't do anything. It just, I narrate that you got thrown through several walls. Whereas you flip to the other end of the spectrum, and maybe you're running something a little more like Image Comics, like Spawn or, Shadow Knight, where you're rolling actual damage for every wall the character interacted with, because that's the way the world works for them. So I think there's a gradient there that works really well with Savage Worlds.
I think my thing is that people, I don't know if I'm going off to left field, but my whole thought about it was that a lot of times people say they want this, but then when you bring it into the game, they don't really want it. Like my thought was consequences, bringing consequences into a game. But then, so you have murder hobos in any game. Let's say a modern game, a modern game where they're murder hoboing everything, and then you bring the police into it, and you want to bring a trial into it, and all these things, and people just don't seem to really want to do that. They may think they do, but I've never really seen a group that says, "Oh God, well, why are the police coming after us now?" And getting all upset about it, because it's consequences, and that's what would happen.
See, an ETU handles that really well, because in that world, because of the couple of kind of subtexts that are there, that the supernatural does exist, but the supernatural is not widely known about. Like, they put in the Buffy the Vampire rule of all the demons and bad guys and vampires all turn to dust at the end of the scene, and the police always arrive 10 minutes too late.
Right, your camera doesn't work, the footage is blurry, so the brownies ruin your equipment, so nobody can see anything. Yeah, I'm playing ETU right now. I know all about all that kind of fun stuff.
But it works because, again,
and it does.
It doesn't take away from the ability to have that be the real world. If you really want a gritty version of ETU, I don't think that works as well.
And we've kind of done that with the police things, and myself and another one of the players, our characters are always joking about every adventure. We're going to end up getting hurt, so we can go to the emergency room and hit on Nurse Betty. So we've kind of made it a thing where, we know all the doctors and nurses. They know us in the emergency room. They don't know why we come in with broken bones and a bloody mess, but they know us. We know them, and so that's made it where it's real life, but it's kind of a fun thing to do in the game where, if it's just like, well, you're in the hospital for 2 weeks, that's it. You know, and we kind of gloss over that too. Is you've gone to the hospital and a week's passed. I know some people don't like that either. They would rather not do it that way. That they think that that's just too hand wavy and not real life enough. But you know, it's a game.
Well, and you know, another example of exactly that kind of hand wavy healing thing is one of the rules that came out of Triple Ace games. I want to say it was the Pulp Toolkit, where it was characters automatically heal a wound at the end of every scene. Just automatically, you heal to a wound or heal to full every single scene. That way, no one's ever out of the action, and everyone's able to just play and have a good time in a game where the consequences are very short-lived. You know, it's not to say that you don't have them, but they're short-lived.
That was actually the Daring Tales product line, like not just the Pulp Adventures, but also Daring Tales of the Sprawl and Daring Tales of the Space Lane had that consistent rule.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was kind of great. Wiggy put a lot of really interesting rules that he was doing things that are in the new Suede way back in the day, because there was the ability for players to get bennies. It was like something called surrender, where instead of fighting, you could just surrender, and it was understood that your character wasn't going to die, but they were going to be like captured or monologued against.
Right.
Which I thought was great. I think any of our fans should go back. The Daring Tales series on Triple Ace games was free. You could get the Cyberpunk rules and the Pulp rules for free, which was great.
You still can, and it's a great example of Savage Worlds flexibility, and a great example of finding a setting rule that matches the genre tropes of what you're playing, and kind of reinforcing them. That whole surrender thing is a common thing that happens like in every pulp venture, even in a James Bond. Oh, wait a minute, he can kill 18 guys with a single, while scuba diving with no oxygen tank, fight off a shark. He can do all this incredible shit, but really, he's a top secret agent and he gets knocked out from behind. Never hears a single woman coming who hits him over the back of the head with a frying pan. Well, of course. And so he wakes up on Goldfinger's table going, do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
She had a core skill that included stealth, and therefore it's not unbelievable that she was able to roll really well with a core skill that started at a D4.
I'm not talking about Savage Worlds. I'm talking about real life in the movie. Like, oh, come on.
Okay.
I love how you just said that. Real life in the movie.
Right.
All right. I'm sorry, but during the Brosnan era, I think it was Die Another Day, they go to an ice hotel. Spoiler warning for a decade-old movie. They go to an ice hotel, and in order to kill Bond, they fire a space laser at him while he is like escaping in a rocket sled. And then the space laser turns the ice hotel into a tidal wave, and he has to eject from the rocket sled and use the canopy and the ejection and the parachute to water ski the tidal wave that was made from the ice hotel that got shot with a space laser.
Right.
And the sentence that I just used is not embellished. That happened in a James Bond film.
Right. And if you're running in Savage Worlds, that's a single driving roll followed by a single agility roll. Have a nice day.
I'm just sitting here thinking, all Fonzie did was jump a shark. Good grief, Pierce. Tone it down.
But that's the thing I love about Savage Worlds, right? I mean, if you're at the end of the day, what I just said is, oh, okay, well, this is James Bond universe, so yeah, why not? Give me a driving roll. Any penalties? No, you're James Bond, and you're in a rocket sled.
You can do that shit.
The worst part is that could happen in a game that I'm playing in, and it wouldn't throw me out, because despite being amazingly pulpy cinematic that it is, and a perfect fit for kind of Savage Worlds Turn to 11, it doesn't violate the general idea that, ice turns to water and heat can do that and water runs downhill. all of these things still make sense in the general idea of the real world you're playing in. Whereas you don't have the island floating in the sky today that the sky was made out of pudding yesterday, and it's going to be made out of Jell-O tomorrow.
Sky pudding.
I'm just saying that if you sit down at a table and you do that, it's really cool in the moment. But if you're watching that on film, it's like a 5-year-old wrote that. Like, dude, I am so awesome. Let me tell you all about what James Bond is going to do, okay? Yes, Mr. Abrams, go ahead and tell us what James Bond is going to do.
Okay, question.
And there's going to be screen flares everywhere.
I was about to say, is there lens flare
Yes.
on that shot?
Yes, because it's cool looking.
I think there was actually. Maybe I'm overlaying it now.
So we had Scott on last week, and he kind of alluded to another ace that's putting out a product right now, getting guns wrong. And I want to ask you guys, because none of us are actually like military or former military. None of us are walking around with fully automatic weapons. Like, do you actually want real world gun mechanics to affect your game's gun mechanics? Or are you happy with the roll 2d6, roll 2d8, roll 2d10 and call it done?
I'm quite happy with that because, as you just said, I don't really know a lot about guns. Guns are a mechanic, and you roll your 2d6 plus 1, and if you get over the toughness, then things happen.
Well, I mean, it is kind of like guns are effectively magic. They have a magic powder that summons forth thunder and throws a little pebble through your heart.
Well, I think of the big problem. I think of the big disconnect really is a lot of people come to Savage Worlds and they see different guns listed and they want to go, okay, well, but that's not how that works. Yeah, we know that's not how that works. It does 2d6 damage. It's like we said with like I've said before with Deluxe over and over again. Take the ranged weapons list and anything that's got the same damage and range and rate of fire, draw a line through it. Tell me how many guns you have left off that gear list. I think that's just a conceit of the role-playing community that you have to have a gear table. You just can't say, oh, no, all guns do 2d6.
We can see it right here in the Savage community. We can talk all day long that all I really need is an entry for light, medium, heavy.
Which is how Agents of Oblivion did it.
Yeah, with, pistol, rifle, shotgun, whatever. And then they did that in both Agents of Oblivion, and then Peg actually did it in the Sci-Fi Companion. And it is one of the products that's the most discussed in a negative light in regards to that particular section. People are like, well, what are the stats for a carbine from Star Wars? Or what are the stats for the laser sniper rifle from this? And it's like, people expected you to have these named specific weapons in the gear list because that's what, as players, they've been kind of led to expect.
Conditioned.
And it's just not, it's not what Peg delivered, but it was perfect, and it just kind of gets lost to the wayside.
Dan Riley calls it right. He calls it absolutely right. It's Shadowrun gun porn. People are wanting like 5 or 6 splat books with like guns that have stats and personalities, and you can download AIs and have martinis with them. It's gun porn. Like, just buy guns and ammo, people.
I was going to say, I don't want that. I'm not a big Shadowrun fan, so I don't want that.
I was going to reach into a desk drawer and actually pull out my Street Samurai guidebook that's just gear. But apparently I moved that in preparation for our upcoming move here in a few months.
See, I loved the Street Samurai catalog. I never really played Shadowrun. I liked reading through it just because I think as a product itself, it was cool as fuck. As a game mechanic, to me, it was complete and total bullshit. That, unless you're a min-max player, and unfortunately, my old group were a lot of min-max players and people who wanted every advantage. So you gave them 374 different fucking pistols because everybody wants the perfect one that does the perfect thing for their character to maximize their effectiveness. While I think the whole a pistol's a pistol's a pistol works really well because we're going back to the realism thing. Yes, these guns are not realistic. The problem is that unless I am playing with a group of people who are all complete firearms experts, everyone's version of real is different. Because I can tell you right now, I know what I think a gun can do, but I'm not a gun guy. You know, I know somebody who swore up and down you could take a Magnum 44 and shoot through a tank. Like, no, it doesn't work that way. But that was his realism. That was his thing. This was the ultimate weapon, and nothing you said mattered. So if a Magnum couldn't fire through armor plating, he didn't want to play your game. So realism is subjective because realism, no one's an expert in everything. We can't do it. And I think it's ridiculous to say, oh, well, it's not realistic. Okay, well, are you an expert? No. Then who cares? Roll your goddamn dice.
I think that, like, going back to it, there is that whole, like, crunchy peanut butter moment to where, you know, you're right. It is not realistic to get into a firefight because that's AI, and to have, like, an entire stat block. The other side is going back to, you know, space lasers and ice hotels. If you can find that middle ground between, okay, here's every single mechanical aspect of every single firearm ever made versus space lasers and ice motels, I think that the merging of the two, like the acceptable parameters to suspend disbelief.
I think
you know what?
Ice hotels is an excellent name for a product. Just
all right. Atomic Ninja, copyright 2019.
I think Greg hits on something here that I'd like to explore a little bit. How much is the demand for realism and apologies, Jamie, immersion really just min-maxing I want an I win button in the game? So
I don't want to get too deep in the immersion thing, so I've actually mentioned to you that there's I want to do a special just on immersion coming up.
Right.
But there's a problem with the way the term immersion is used by the typical gamer versus the way it's used by the actual people designing games and who have some training regarding what immersion is supposed to be. The technical definition of immersion is you care about what happens to your character, which I think all of us immediately have that, you know, we don't want our character to die. We want our character to succeed at the things we want him to do. Like, we have that immediate attachment to the character, and you kind of worry about such things. But at the same time, we've all gone, well, no, my immersion is I need to feel like I'm in that place experiencing that thing. Well, you know what? Strap a VR headset on and go play with the newest technology, or have a really powerful imagination so you can tone out the fact that you're rolling little plastic dice on a wooden table that sits between you and me as I describe this thing to you.
I'm going to say, like, normally I would say don't do drugs, kids, but there's a certain time you gotta do it, and if you're gonna get there, I mean, but just chill out, man. Come on.
Well, and I think there's a little bit to be said about, well, dude, you know, the hippy dippy, just no, it's all on your imagination, man. It's your world. Do what you want, brother. Doesn't play for everybody. As one of the reasons I'm not as interested as I am in Fate, I can't cognitively wrap my head around it because I've never seen it played that way.
So one of the things that goes along with this is if I tell you that your character picks up a teapot in the game, you immediately form a mental image of what a teapot looks like. If I then go on to describe your character interacting with that as if it was actually a basketball and not a teapot, but I keep using the word teapot, it's going to break the game for you. And it doesn't matter how much verisimilitude we have, how much pulpy cinematic we have. It doesn't matter how much immersion we've dealt with prior to that moment, because I've just broken your brain by using the wrong word to describe something in the game. And That might be in that world what a basketball is called a teapot, but you're not expecting that word for that item in that location. And it can really break down the game. The other side of this is that if you actually know the fine detail, and we had, again, I'll reference Scott, something Scott has said on the show before, that he has been next to another soldier who took fire, was hit by a bullet, and that was a through and through flesh wound that did not impair his ability to fight, and that the guy said he didn't even feel it due to the adrenaline that was going through him. And he had to be told later that he had taken a hit. Yet at the same time, we all know one bullet can kill you, if not instantly, damn near close to it. Mm. So how do you narrate the large variance in verisimilitude that's available in reality for a bullet without breaking the game because I gave you words that don't seem to make sense with the idea of a bullet passing through your body? Just like calling a basketball a teapot, if I tell you, you just got shot in the head with a shotgun at close range, and then I tell you that you took no damage, I'm going to break the game to a certain extent because you have an expectation of what that shotgun blast to someone's face is going to do.
Right. Well, I think we all in role-playing games are running this gambit of, if you look at things too closely, it becomes an episode of Mythbusters with the rule set, with the rule book, right? It's, well, I shoot out the tires. Okay, does that happen in an action movie? Yeah, it happens all the time. In real life, no, you're not going to be able to. Hold on a second. This is Die Hard. The rules for Die Hard are not the rules for the real world. Physics don't work exactly the same. Physics have dramatic plot twists and holes to them. And I think when there's a certain amount of that, it's just gauging what your players' level of understanding what reality is, I think has a lot to do with it. And I think it's one of the pitfalls that we keep falling into when we see posts on the community pages and everything else. Those are all, in my opinion, analytical masturbation. They're reading the rules and going, well, this isn't how it realistically works. And instead of going, well, wait a minute, in the framework of the game and what we're doing in the game, does this work? And I don't think that those criticisms about this isn't real enough, this isn't accurate enough, are being done in the context and framework of in-game play.
Well, and also, tying it to Savage Worlds, Fast Furious fun. I don't need 8 zillion different kinds of guns. I don't need all this stuff. I need the game to move. I need the game to keep going. I need that pace to be that Fast Furious fun. And I think that if you look at Savage Worlds with those glasses on, some of the decisions that are made make a little more sense.
Yeah, I think taking a step back and looking at the way Clint and company have designed the game, especially look at Suede and the number of things that you can now do as either a free action or that you can do on every action that you couldn't used to do. I never could punch multiple times in the same round unless I took 2-fisted before. Now with one fist, I can punch 3 times. Now, I can't do anything else, but that, again, the limitation there isn't to say that it's not possible to throw more than 3 punches in 6 seconds. It's to say, no, but we need to give everybody else at the table a chance to do something, Dave, within the confines of a game. And this mechanic means that everyone gets to do something fun, and you get to do something that's pretty close to reality. I mean, can you really throw more than 3 punches that are absolutely effective in 6 seconds?
And I think that's where the rule comes in and enforces a little bit of reality, right? So, yeah, you can throw 3 haymakers. Go ahead, go for it. You're not going to be as effective as taking your time and doing it once. So that's why you're having the multi-action penalty for doing it, right? I agree to a certain limit. I think too that it just there is so much just contention within our own community about this is bullshit, or dude, relax, this is bullshit. Well, we talked about it last week too, right? With the definition of a longsword, that came up as an actual topic that we spent 5 to 8 minutes discussing.
Yeah, the difference between a katana and a
Nerds.
sword and all of that. And at the end of the day, the longsword has historically been wrong in every game that's ever existed. But no one's ever called it out because it fucking works for the game mechanic we're trying to achieve. And do we really care? Like,
Well, and like what Greg was saying too, it depends on what you've seen and what you understand and accept as reality. Listen, I've been watching season after season of The Walking Dead. From what I can see, you can one-handed slice off a zombie's head with a katana in one stroke. I see that happen every goddamn week on that show.
Realism's always been a bad thing for me for games because I'm mostly a superhero GM and some fantasy / science fiction. So there is no reality in anything that I'm doing. You know, if I wanted to be realistic, my games would be completely different. You cannot pick up a car by grabbing it from the front and lifting. In real life, no, the front bumper is going to shred off this car. It just structurally can't do it. You cannot catch a Buick because even if you were strong enough to lift a car, your feet are on concrete. You're going to sink into it. That's just physics. It doesn't work. But it's a superhero game. Superman does not grab onto something and go through the floor. Batman doesn't punch through a car windshield and break his arm. It just doesn't work. So you have to kind of be a little fast and loose with the physics, which is one of the reasons that I never cared about all the names for things or all the different stuff. It for my players, it was, if Savage Worlds was around back when I was in college, we'd have been Savage Worlds players because everything had to be now. It had a flow, it had to go quick, and it had to just make sense in terms of what you were doing. We're living a comic book where a man can leap. A normal human being can leap up and grab onto the second floor because that's just what the rules said it. You know, real physics is a human being under normal circumstances cannot jump more than 4 feet. People are watching this are going to say that's wrong, but it's true. Reach up to your ceiling and make a mark on your wall, or outside, make a mark with chalk on a brick wall. Jump as high as you can and make another mark. No one is going to be above 4 feet unless you're like an NBA player who's been jumping forever. And even then, most of them can't do it. You can only have a hang time of 1 second. That is physics. It does not work anywhere else, or you'd be jumping way higher. It's just the way it is. But that's not how games work. In games, we can jump up on top of cars. Why? Because the rules say we can.
So, in regards to this, just because I want to hear this story on the show, I have to throw it to Greg to answer this one. How much damage does a fish do?
An edged fish or a blunt fish?
This is a question he actually received while walking into a room while someone else was GMing. He was asked, how much damage does a fish do? And that's the reaction. Like, do we really care if it's a bass or a marlin or anything? What does it do in a game when I throw a fish at you?
Well, I would like someone to explain to me from the comic universe because, as I said, I'm a complete outsider and noob. How exactly does Superman increase his speed while he's flying? Is it like he just bears down and like?
Yeah.
Okay. Superman has a biofield that is powered by Earth's yellow sun, and because of that, do what?
He farts.
Yes.
If the man can inhale and exhale at such velocity that he can freeze somebody with his breath, then yes, when he wants to increase his speed, it's burrito time.
Guys, I don't know if you guys have ever watched a channel called Game Theory, but the guy Matt Pack actually did a scientific breakdown of why if Superman raced the Flash, it would actually kill us all. Because the Flash has the speed force, which allows him to move super fast without killing himself or others. But Superman doesn't, so he's going to cram all of the air molecules into this giant bomb that's just going to wipe out humanity.
Hashtag nerdgasm as Dustin goes off on yet another tangent.
I can't talk about Star Wars.
Well, it's the whole thing. The old Larry Niven little expose: Man of Steel, Woman of Kleenex. Right? Why in a real world situation, Superman and Lois Lane could never copulate, could never reproduce. He'd kill her.
Well, it's they're little things. It's why comic book physics are the way they are. If you really go into, like, DC is the worst violator of these rules because they have, like, Superman, who once pushed the planet to the side. No, it does. You can't do that.
Wait, what?
Yeah, in one comic book, to avoid some kind of catastrophe, Superman flew straight down, grabbed onto the Earth, and shoved the Earth out of orbit because he could. And this was just one of those things. In Marvel Comics, one of their fastest people is Quicksilver. He can move 300 miles an hour, as compared to the Flash, who can move at the speed of light while running backwards on a treadmill. It's insane the power differences between some of these things. But like Superman, the man has every part of him is supposed to be so far beyond human that, like we just said a little bit ago, he could exhale and freeze people solid. That's just a comic book fact. Why does he not knock over half of Metropolis when he sneezes? Doesn't make any sense. They made a comment in one of the cartoons that they did where Superman feels like everything around him is made of tissue paper because of how strong he is. Yet, as Clark Kent, he's constantly tripping over things. He would be smacking holes in buildings just walking. It makes no sense.
It's when he puts the glasses on that it changes everything.
I guess. I mean, those, the glasses change everything. But even as Superman, he's hovering in midair and he reaches out to casually pick something up. He's breaking things. He's that strong. His hair is supposed to be indestructible. Why does he not look like a caveman?
Right. How does he stay clean shaven? Right.
He
Supposedly
actually
he uses a mirror
and his heat vision.
Yeah. He uses a mirror like these lasers that he puts out of his eyes won't melt through a mirror.
Yeah.
But somehow this is effective. We don't know why. It just is. It's asinine. But it's comic book stuff. I mean, I read, there was a book, I don't remember what it is, years and years ago, back when I was in college, where they were talking about what would real life superpowers really do for you. If you were invulnerable, you would die because you can't get any vitamins from the sun. Your skin's invulnerable. It's repelling everything. You would be pasty white and you would get no nutrients from everything around you because you can't get a suntan. A suntan is damage. Every time you go out into the sun, it is damaging your skin. If you're invulnerable, you don't get a tan. It just doesn't work. You're resistant to damage.
Yeah. So I've always said that my superpower of choice, a lot of people will choose flying, invulnerability. My superpower of choice would be the ability to ejaculate money. Like a slot machine.
Okay, so you have to think about, like, would it be certain currency?
Silver dollars. Silver dollars.
So I would go with gold.
I hope you're pooping them.
Yeah, like little bricks.
Ejaculating coins would hurt.
No, but it's a superpower, so it doesn't.
So to bring us back on topic.
Wow. I didn't even know what to say.
That's the money shot right there, folks.
Exactly. Literally.
Okay, so we are definitely not a family-friendly show tonight.
Listen, this podcast has never claimed to be safe for public consumption.
I mean, but we're taking this to a whole other level at this point, man. I feel like the gauntlet was thrown down somewhere.
So again, let me try to redirect. Scott brought up an interesting point last week when he said that, the hobby started out as something that, like, it was the guys who were running the science department at the local college that started our hobby. and we've slowly grown the hobby over the last several decades to the point now the general public is pretty much part of this hobby. You know, nerd culture has become couture. It's the in thing to be a nerd and to play D&D and to do what they do on Critical Role. Is that part of why we're seeing this trend to demand more verisimilitude? Because those people don't understand how that's going to break the game versus the guys who actually created the game decades ago and are still kind of shepherding the kind of that core hardcore audience that wants the more narrative, the less verisimilitude in the game, because they know as soon as you try to replicate what a gun does in a game, it breaks the game. Is that where we're seeing this breakdown?
Yeah. So there's a video I watched a while back, and it was a critique on movies. And in that critique on movies, they said there are certain things that aren't cliche, they're passively cliche, which means that you'll have that sort of like violin solo while you get the heartfelt tug at the heartstrings and somebody says something completely ridiculous. You get them in every movie. Like, there are certain things that never happen, but because they happen so often in a film, we think that they're actually supposed to happen that way. Like a romantic comedy. Dude, you would get arrested if you tried to do anything from a romantic comedy. They're all the same movie, though.
Well, I don't know if that necessarily answers Dave's question, but I agree to a certain amount that there's this expectation of new players coming into the hobby, the next generation, that predates all of us who grew up secretly playing in shame in a basement among friends who were like-minded. I think it's this. I can't believe I'm about to say this, but it goes to me along the same lines as the evolution of porn. The fact that it used to be a movie.
Y'all trying to get us back on topic?
Yeah, follow me on the trend of logic. It used to be something that was difficult to get your hands on. You had to work to find a source of it, to the point where then it became democratized a little bit. You could go to video stores and you could get physical media for it. And then eventually it's become I think I'll watch some porn. Click, instant. Click this, click that, instant. And I don't think new people coming into the hobby are appreciating the fact that they're standing on the shoulders of everybody that came before them to do it. With that said, I think they're bringing along a new expectation of, hey, I see it happen in a movie. We're telling a story, right? That's the idea. This is a cooperative storytelling game. Then what's with all the rules? Why can't I just say we're telling a shared story, right? Why can't I just say blah happens? And I think there's that expectation there.
Because it's a role-playing game.
Well, I think there's a little pushback because we're like, no, hold on. Yeah, you have certain liberties, but there's also rules we follow.
So when I brought this up, I don't want it to sound like I'm saying, well, it's entirely the problem of the younger generation. Like, millennials are ruining gaming or anything. But more what I'm trying to say is I think that as the expectations of the audience shifts, what designers are going to have to provide as far as verisimilitude is going to have to shift with it. I don't think the people who are playing today who go into it and go, but I don't have a list of guns, actually want every gun that's ever existed from every producer that ever produced one accurately represented with the number of shots it can fire in a round, the size of the magazine, all of those things. I don't think that's what these people actually want as gamers. I think they want something that looks like that, but still delivers what they need to have what Chris keeps saying, a fast, furious, fun Savage Worlds experience at the table. Because I don't want to take the time to have to create the stats for an M60 if I can just flip in the book and look up, well, there's the M60. I don't care that it has the same stats as every other heavy machine gun in the book. I only care that when I needed an M60, I can turn to the book and pull out an M60 and use it right then.
Right. No, I get what you're saying. I see that. I see what you're saying with that. I had a thought and it's gone. It'll come back to me. It's.
Think, Jerry.
I think here's what I think. I think even with Savage Worlds, the hobby is evolving away from being a miniatures war game.
Yeah.
More so than anything else, and that's causing the shift of, man, I don't need all these detailed things, but there's still that pushback of the old school. Hey, I need to know how many inches on tabletop this thing shoots. So when I set out my mini that I spent the last 2 weeks painting, it's actually useful on the table. I think there's still a little bit of the miniature wargaming aspect that's driving the I need stats for this. I need stats for that. I need stats for this. I think there's a certain expectation.
And I need and the fact that I need minis for this.
Right.
So let me ask this then, and maybe this is very much more poignant Savage Worlds question, since Savage Worlds handles this very differently than other systems. Is Savage Worlds providing more verisimilitude to the player than, say, your D&Ds, your BattleTechs, your other, tabletop move, miniatures around on the board combat system, because it gets rid of the grids, it gets rid of things like, it can go 6 squares. No, in Savage Worlds, it can go a certain number of inches, and it can go that in any direction you want. Pull out a tape measure and actually measure that out on your tabletop. Are we providing more verisimilitude through Savage Worlds than you're going to get from, say, a D&D, where it's, oh, the fireball hits these specific squares in this specific pattern, instead of, well, here's the template for how big it is. Lay it over the table where you want it to hit.
So
again, I just think it's quick. It just makes things faster.
I gotta tell you, this is one of those things that I've noticed, going off of what you just said, Dave, going kind of along with what you just said, Chris. I played a D&D game. It was like old school. It was like 2nd edition with some friends, and they pulled out their encyclopedias of spells, and they had like 5 volumes, and it kind of broke my brain a little, because why do you need 5 different books that are all effectively bolt with trappings?
Well, I think a little bit to answer Dave's question too. I think what Savage Worlds has done to the verisimilitude of miniatures on a table and wargaming simulationism is done what it does with the other rules and abstracted it wildly. So, like Dave said, you no longer go, well, it can only move this many hexes. You can't going through a diagonal direction. If you have to shift, you can't slide underneath things. We ran into that when we were playing the Rise of the Rune Lords thing with the actual GM who GM's Pathfinder Society play. He was like, well, you can't do that in D&D. Like, well, wait a minute. What do you mean I can't run towards a thing that's obviously off the ground, drop to my knees and slide underneath it and slice its belly as I keep going? Well, it's just not part of the rule set. The rules don't allow you to do that. And I think Savage Worlds, it takes that and just says, and abstracts it a little bit. It says, hey, movement is movement is movement. All we care about is how many inches on tabletop you move in total. Not if you do 2 inches this way, 1 inch sidestep, and then another inch, and then attack, and then back off an inch. And the whole thing about, well, it hits this template. Chunk. That's, to me, that's Savage Worlds abstracting the more detailed versions of the tabletop combat war game. So I think this is what, in my opinion, what Savage Worlds does, and does very, very well. It says, hey, here's a generic rule set for telling cinematically engaging stories. we don't care about the individual details so much as the overall what impact they have on the story that you're telling at your table. So I think it hits a nice stride, a mixture of here's some very abstract and narrative or abstract rules that come from narrative purposes. But if you want to break out miniatures and figure it out and play it out on the table, here's some rules that do that as well. Does it do it to the same level that D&D does, or other Starfleet battles? Oh my god, no, because that's not the game system that is being designed.
So I want to touch on something that Dan Riley said in chat. He said that miniature wargaming will continue to be an important part of RPGs, since you can now use Hero Forge and or 3D printer to design a character besides it just looks cool. Here's what I'm going to say to that. 3D printing and all the stuff that goes with it, all the miniatures aspects of gaming is never going to go away. I don't necessarily agree with Jared that we're evolving away from the wargaming aspect of the hobby. What I will say is this: I think the hobby is expanding to include non-wargaming specific styles along with the wargaming specific style. Because if you release a purely theater of the mind product, you absolutely take it on the chin from the reviewers. You absolutely take it on the chin from the customers. You absolutely take it on the chin from even your play testers. And I'm saying this from very specific experience. We just released Savage Daddy's One Shot Wonders, and despite an amazing review that it received from the Wild Eye podcast, like one of the things they mentioned is that there's no maps. Is that they were expecting, battle maps for these adventures, and there weren't any. And that's something that a reviewer is just going to expect to come with an RPG product. Look at every Kickstarter out there has a handful of battle maps. Charles White, Chris's business partner, has an entire business plan built on the idea of here are battle maps for every kind of building or architectural structure you could play around, because he knows he's got a fan base that absolutely is going to eat that up because they need it for their games. So I don't think that's ever going to go away, but I think that what's happening is the hobby is moving in a direction that allows you to do that and something else at the same time equally.
Yeah.
Can I kind of like jump off for a little bit really quick? So
as
I don't
long
know.
As long as it's not about Star Wars.
Oh, it's not about Star
Okay.
Wars. Hashtag Dustin, stop talking about Star Wars. In the new, I don't know, we're talking about, tabletop war games, and hopefully they won't sue us. But in the new Dark Imperium, there are miniatures where they have made Space Marines. The Primaris Space Marines are literally, let's go a step further with these guys, and it breaks the lore. So there's a certain part, and I think that kind of touches on a little bit what we're kind of like grasping at is, I think that the world has to make sense within itself, because when it starts breaking its own rules, then we're like, that's where the real underlying is. No, you can't do that in real life. I think what we're really saying is, no, you can't do that in that world based off of the concept we all have.
See, and I think that goes back to the whole immersion thing that I was talking about earlier. You have to walk the fine line between breaking your game and doing something that makes sense. And again, if the world has that shifting sky I mentioned earlier, where today it's pink, tomorrow it's purple, the following day it's going to be bright yellow, then having that world have rules that change makes sense. It doesn't work for me, but it makes sense. But in that world, if you suddenly violate the way you've set up those rules, so that suddenly you say, well, while the sky can do that, the grass is always magenta and never changes, that can break the game. Right. And I think that's that place where you have to be careful when you're choosing the level of verisimilitude to include is your verisimilitude has to not just be a simulation of the real world, but it has to be consistent simulation of whatever world it's in.
Right.
So if I use a gun, it should do the same thing in the same world every time.
Right. So, and here's another example, and I'm sorry, Dustin, I'm going to use Star Wars as an example because it's a perfect example.
We got to turn this into a drinking game now.
Single biome planets. What? Wait, you're telling me there's a solar system, a solar system that has 2 suns, and your explanation for an entire planet that's nothing but desert is it gets real hot.
Yep.
Or that's the moon, but guess what? It's a forest moon. It's only forest. The entire moon is all forest. Oh, but there's this ice planet called Hoth. Wait, let me guess. All snow all the time? Yes. And here's the thing. For Star Wars, that does not break the reality of Star Wars. If you try to compare that to the real world, it's like, come on.
Ask any NASA scientist what they think of the Star Wars planetoids, and they will lose their shit. But at the same time, it works for the people watching the movie.
Yeah, it's a stylistic choice.
How on earth did they not just float away?
We're not allowed to talk about Star Wars. What were you going to say, Chris?
No, go ahead.
Well, it's here's the thing. It's part of a pulp trope where you would have single styled atmosphere planets. It's all part of a space. It's just paying homage to that classic sci-fi helmets and ray guns space trope.
Right. And
it's a jungle planet.
And all I was going to say is in Star Wars, it's an expectation.
Yes.
Absolutely. So I think there's certain aspects of that go with it too. Like if you're gonna play a Weird Wars game, they expect the supernatural to intrude. But if you're gonna play a Weird Wars 2 game, not only do they expect the supernatural, but someone's gonna expect there to be Nazis. Someone's gonna expect there to be the Allied forces. Someone's going to expect there to be the rest of the Axis, including the Italians and the Japanese, because those are the iconic things that existed in World War II. Now, it might be Nazi werewolves and Japanese yang shui, but they're going to be those things because that's what your players are expecting. If you suddenly say instead that World War II in your Weird Wars world has, the North Pole attacking, and it's attacking with polar bears and yetis, it's not going to work as well because they know that doesn't work with World War II. If you take that even further and you go, it's the South Pole that's attacking and it's only penguins, you're going to have a revolt on your hands because everyone knows penguins don't come from the South Pole.
Everybody knows that penguins are lovable creatures. They are voiced by Morgan Freeman.
So I think we're saying verisimilitude on its own terms. By all means, you should have some sense of reality, quote unquote, but it has to be the reality for your story and for your world. It's like you're not going to play an Old West game and have somebody show up with an M16 and have everybody be okay with it, right? Like, wait a minute. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean M16.
Play an assassin.
I didn't mean M16. I meant Gatling gun. But I'm going to use the same stats for an M16 in the game. I'm just going to call it a Gatling gun because that's the terminology that fits for the Old West, right? And I want to say a little bit something too. Just want to touch real briefly on maps and that versus theater of the mind. If you're used to playing with miniatures on a table, or you're used to, I have to have a map in front of me to understand what's going on, and then you're thrown into a game where it's all 100% theater of the mind, there is a shift there. There is a learning curve. Because I've seen it, and Dave will attest to this, Chris will attest to this.
Happens to me all the time.
I run theater of the mind exclusively. Now, I'll use Roll20, and I'll show pictures that represent kind of what's going on and say, hey, this is an old style Victorian man. This is a Victorian mansion. It's a rundown Victorian mansion. Don't need to ask me what's in it. You can go ahead and feel free to have narrative control to say, I'm in a garage, I pick up a hammer without asking me if there's a hammer there. If it makes sense that it would be there, it's there.
So, stupid story about Dave gaming. For years, I played just Theater of the Mind. When we were kids, we didn't have enough money to spend on all the extras, so we didn't have maps. If you had to do minis on the table, someone pulled out their extra dice and set them out in a pattern on the table.
Yep.
So the D6 is the ogre, the D20 is the dragon, that sort of thing. So, I mean, that was the level that I gamed at as a kid, and I think where a lot of us were, because, again, most of us as kids didn't have a lot of money to throw around. As I got older, we got real heavy into maps, and then we went from maps into the digital space. So I was playing with things like map tools, where I could drop an animated dragon figurine into the game, and all my players got to not only see the dragon, but I could actually have field of view and vision cones and lighting and everything turned on, so that they had kind of this immersive digital experience for what their character was seeing at any given time.
Right.
I played that way pretty exclusively for about 10 years. And then I dropped into a game run by Jared for the very first time when he and I first met. And he has me playing in a complete Theater of the Mind. And he goes, so what do you do? And I go, well, I guess I run across and attack the guy. And he goes, well, you can't get there from here. Well, what do you mean? Well, it's like a concourse, but there's this opening and you have to kind of go around it. And I'm like, well, how far can I get? He goes, narratively, you can get about halfway. And I'm like, well, but where is that? Can I hide behind a trash can? Because there's nothing there for me to reference. I don't have a map. I don't have anything. And I was so rooted in one style of gaming that I just ran square into that wall. And it took me a solid 3 months to get to where I could play Theater of the Mind again, despite the fact it's the way I grew up playing these games. I couldn't do it anymore because I was so out of practice.
And I use Theater of the Mind because when I got back into gaming with when Savage Worlds came out, we were running in Vegas. There was a group running a local weekly con on Saturdays in a library space. And one of the game masters I played in the game with keyed it in for me because there were no maps on the table. I'm like, well, wait. How far away is this giant like brontosaurus? How far away is it? And he goes, why? What are you trying to do? I said, well, I want to pop a grenade and throw it in its mouth, but how far is it? And he looked at me without taking a beat, went plot appropriate distance. Go ahead and give me a roll. And that stuck with me, like plot appropriate distance. Yeah, I don't need a map.
I use that all the time.
Yeah.
It's plot appropriate distance.
I mean, it's because
go ahead and give me a throwing roll, no penalty. Go for it.
So, I mean, I'll throw this out there, kind of, a sideline thing. Atomic Ninja is actually working on several projects at once, and plot appropriate distance has now been shortened to the acronym PAD, and we measure things in pads in certain things. Even when it's, something for Savage Worlds, when we're talking about it internally, it's like, well, this is this many pads long.
Well, and because narratively, it doesn't matter. We're not doing a wargaming simulation. It's a part of the storytelling. So you can see it, and I've seen it with all kinds of players coming into it, where the first few sessions are asking, can I do this? Can I do that? Can I do this? And then when you go, you have the freedom to do what you want. If it doesn't exist or is it going to work, I'll tell you otherwise. Go with it. Okay, well, I pick up the crowbar in the auto body shop and I bash the zombie's head in with it. Yeah, that's exactly what you fucking do. Give me a roll. I don't need to have a laid out map with grids and a gear list of everything that's there, because it's just not needed. And it's a little bit of busy work. As a GM, I'm lazy as shit. That's why I do Theater of the Mind. I don't want to go find maps for every possible contingency of every possible thing the players are going to do, because it slows down the game. Oh, well, we walk into a saloon. A saloon? Well, I didn't plan on there being a saloon in this old west town. I don't have a map for that saloon. Holy shit. Hold on a second, guys. Everybody take a 10-minute bio break while I scurry through the internet looking for a map of a fucking saloon. We all know what a saloon is. You walk through the swinging date doors. People are playing poker. There's a guy playing piano. There's a bar and a staircase leading upstairs. Go. But I digress. We have anything, or coming up on the end of the hour here? Anything in the chat that we want to talk about that we haven't addressed?
I'm just in here, not seeing anything that I don't think we've really touched on. People are commenting on things like, the hopping vampires or the dice as stand-ins, but I don't think nobody's bringing up any actual conversation points or right, asking any questions. I will say that
I'm sleepy.
That one of the things I absolutely love with Suede is the fact that not only did they keep what they had done before to allow you to bring enough realism into the game to keep it consistent, but at the same time to give you enough narrative control, they really leaned into that. Things like the Benny for narrative control lets players even be part of that flow now. And I really like that they've leaned pretty heavily into keeping this game where it is, where you can have just the right amount of verisimilitude for your group.
And I'm gonna say something in our current beta play testing for Dead End for Suede. That narrative Benny mechanic works incredibly well. I had a player going, well, we're in an RV, we're driving. I'm gonna spend a Benny. We come across a roadside motel. Okay, describe this roadside motel that you found, because it takes the onus off me as a GM to go, well, this is your bit. You tell me, and it works brilliantly. It really works really well. Note to all Savage Worlds Adventure Edition GMs: time to step your improv skill chops up. And on that note, we'll go ahead and end the podcast. So until next time, this is Jared Savage Natigunning for Chris, Dave, Dustin, and Greg, saying keep rolling and stay savage.